Welcome
Welcome
to Modern Mind
to Modern Mind
Ancient Book,
Ancient Book,
where we, together, explore one of the most important books in human history. Alright, Nick, welcome to another Modern Mind Ancient Book.
Glad to be here.
Good. We had an interesting service today, huh?
Yes, we did. That was right on the brink, but God moved.
Yeah. So, just for the listener, we're praying that something real special happens at church with the Spirit, and God's moving all over the place. It looks real good. So, service today was super good. We're gonna do today the Book of Ruth, a survey of the Book of Ruth. So we just finished with Judges, and this particular book actually happened somewhere during the time of Judges. So we kind of can't date it, and we kind of can't tell you the author, but we can say that it may have been Samuel, or it may have been some scribe in David's court, but this was definitely a story that was carried from the time of Judges in Israel until it was written. So, we're thinking, what was it, somewhere around 1100 BC, something like that, is that about right?
Yep, right around that time frame.
Yeah, somewhere around that time. Previous to Gideon?
Right, yes, which was, almost 1200, and then...
Yeah, and it's quite interesting. So, the Hebrew, the Greek, the title is the major character of the book. And she was from Moab, not Israel.
Right. No, I was raising the eyebrow because I heard the V sound, and I was like, oh, wait a second, okay.
Yeah. And it's about God's loyal covenant love during the dark days of Judges. And so the rabbi suggests that Samuel wrote it, and perhaps that's the case. David was mentioned, so maybe that was a scribal thing.
Right, added after the fact.
Yeah.
Yep.
But we just don't know.
Right.
There's problems. This story is about Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz, and it takes place during Judges. Every generation had to learn the necessity of obedience during the time. Naomi's sons married foreign women, and 2 of the 3 did not stay, but one did, and her name was Ruth, and she was from Moab. She's not even Jewish, but the whole story is about her and Boaz and Naomi, which is interesting, especially considering she ends up in the line of Jesus.
Right.
So this is an interesting book, because Israel was called to be a nation and to go into the land of Canaan and push the Kanaf, those who to be pushed aside, out of the land. But they didn't. And the Moabites were part of those who did not get pushed out. And the story tells us that all of Naomi's sons died, except for one who was too young. And they also happened to marry the daughters of the people that they should have pushed out, which in the law says they shouldn't do.
And Ruth was one of those, and yet here she is,
In the Bible.
Yep.
And it turns out, so Naomi is interesting because she gets bitter. Calls herself bitter.
Is Mara?
Yeah. And then she goes back to the land, and she tells the other girls, just go on. They're like, yeah, I'll go back to my dad's house.
What did Naomi mean? I think that when I was rereading this book, it meant something along the lines of like joyful or sweetness, and so it went to the opposite. The exact opposite.
Yeah. It's God's way.
Yeah.
It's the play.
Right.
Right? And that's what makes these books so worth reading. Even if you're not faithful, they're just great reads if you understand them.
Right.
It's the turn of events. It's the switch up. It's the character and story developments. It's how all of the law before it is summarized in Boaz's actions. So you actually have to know the law to understand Boaz. You have to know the law to understand how gleaning from the edge of the field, showing favor by bundling and throwing out bundles to the edge of the field for...
That was a process which they would have understood, and yeah.
And they would have seen, he kind of took sweet to her.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Because his servants were instructed to look out for her.
Yes, specifically.
And they were
don't
instructed to bundle up fruits, the good stuff, and drop it out at the edge of the field so she had something to take back.
Right.
Now, what kind of man was Boaz? An interesting guy.
Yeah.
And then the story also records something about her uncovering his feet in the middle of the night.
Which is a strange detail.
Which we'll go into at a later date.
Right.
So, it's a great book. The best part of this for me is that it's one of those stories like Job, where you don't know from where it came, necessarily, but you do know why it's there.
Right, okay. I understand what you're saying there, yeah.
Yeah. So, you see this character who, though being a foreigner, lived for the sake of obedience, love. She had great character. And so God adopted her.
Right.
And she adopted God. It's a conversion story.
It is.
It's Jacob to Israel. It's Avram to Abraham. It's just exactly as the Bible tells us these things happen. It's all the stories of Jesus where some foreigner comes up to him and he's like, gosh, I wish this faith were here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's all throughout history. So it's one of the books that, like Job, tells me that God is not the God of Israel. He's the God of all men, and he chose the nation to bring the Messiah. He chose a people to give us the law, to teach us who he is, and to bring about his purpose. But it never was about an ethnic group of people. It was about him working through a people who are just stubborn enough to be alive today, still worshiping him.
Right.
Even having been removed from the land 3 times, scattered throughout the nations, and now gathered back in it, and fighting for that piece of land.
Mm-hmm.
It's, the Bible is a very, very well put together book.
That's an amazing thing, and I appreciate how people who don't necessarily believe that what it says is true will say it's great literature. And it is. But I'm still amazed that someone can enjoy the great literature and not see it for what it,
Well, there are people like Jordan Peterson started that way.
Yes, he did.
And now he's crying on television.
Because he saw it, and one of the things that I appreciated that he said, and maybe it's something that you can grasp best if you follow some of his other work, because I do, but somebody said, is it true? The Bible's a good story, and you can glean good lessons from it, but is it true?
Is it true?
And he said, after having the crying fits on social media, he said, it's not only true, it's truer than just literally true. Mm. And I thought that was an excellent answer, because, yeah, we do believe that these events took place, that these were real people and these situations...
Well, we don't even have to believe it, because they're proven time and time again by archaeology.
Absolutely.
The historicity of the places.
But absolutely. And some of them are hard evidence, indisputable, but maybe something like Ruth, we say, well, did Ruth actually...
Yes.
There's records of her. But he was saying, not only are there records to back these things up, there's archaeology, there's non-biblical historical documents that confirm, not only that, but there's a deeper truth than anything we could ever lay hands on, anything that we could ever read, and even though that's what Christians have been saying for centuries, I thought just the conciseness to the way that he said it, it's truer than just literally true.
Yeah, I think if you spend time reading it, you're eventually going to be confronted with the fact that the stories have much more meaning than you thought they did.
And that's what I think he was getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in this case, with Ruth, it, like you were saying, it's not.
It's a motif.
It is a motif, and it matters that she's outside of the Jewish group. That even though technically that wasn't supposed to be how it went, she's in the line of Jesus. Nothing in the Bible, like, it's not enough that it's great literature. Nothing that's in there is a mistake. And that's amazing, too.
Well, so I love this book because it's an overturning of the point of Judges. So Judges says, foreign oppressors are going to come and oppress them, but I will send you a judge that will destroy them.
Yeah.
But this is just one woman who is a foreigner that didn't seek to overcome, but to become part of, to be obedient to lay down her life. When she said, I will stay with you, your gods will be my gods, what she said is, I surrender.
Right.
So you don't need to conquer just by force.
No. And she didn't have any force behind her.
It wasn't Samson, it was the exact opposite.
Right. And what success she had wasn't by force, it was by the mercy
it was love.
Yeah.
It was kindness, compassion, great character, a heart that was plowed and a seed that was planted.
Right.
Until it grew and became an Israelite.
Yeah.
A foreigner became an Israelite.
And isn't it funny? She was redeemed through Boaz, but then Naomi through her. Mm-hmm. Naomi, who was
an Israelite.
Yeah.
She stopped being bitter and she started rejoicing.
Yeah.
And then the king of Israel came from Naomi too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite an interesting thing. So. Let's go back to the date part there, because we'll just talk about kind of some of the story here. So, second paragraph down. This was a period when every generation, or first paragraph, second line, had to learn lessons of obedience to the Lord. So Israel would forsake the Lord and choose idolatry. The Lord would send foreign nations to oppress them. Israel would cry out in prayer for deliverance, and the Lord would send a deliverer to liberate them. Which is the exact opposite of what Ruth is, right? So the book itself even gets turned upside down by a story that takes place within it that's also recorded outside of it to help navigate the book of Judges. But at the same time, we call it a spirit thing.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a God intervention moment through the heart of a person who was not like the nation, the direction of the nation, but was like the nation because Boaz right. and her are the same.
Yes.
That's why they found compatibility.
Mm-hmm.
It's the law keeper without knowing the law.
Mm-hmm.
So the story begins with Israel under the judgment of God by evidence of a famine. That's how the sons died, right? So Elimelech takes his family from Bethlehem to Moab to escape the famine. They are in the land at least 10 years. And this is the thing too, right? The faithful get dispersed.
Right.
Right? Because of sin or whatever, right? Some problem. Then they go out and they have this experience and then God brings them back. That is also a motif. The story ends with the birth of Obed and a reference to him being the grandfather of King David. The prominence that is given to David and the lack of reference to Solomon indicates that the book is finalized during the early reign of David. Finalized, right?
Right.
And before the birth of Solomon, Shlomo. The fact that Ruth is the great-grandmother of David provides a setting of 3 generations before the birth of David. David is born around 1041 BC when the Philistines were harassing Israel. David was the youngest of many brothers, indicating that his mother gave birth to him later in life. Ruth had been married for 10 years before moving to Bethlehem and marrying Boaz. Taking all of these ages into account, the story of Ruth probably takes place somewhere between 1140 and 1100 BC. Some commentators suggest that the book took place during the period of Gideon, but this seems a little late. Let's side note for a minute.
Okay.
So, this book sheds light on the past, and because of the law, right? You got to know the law to understand what Boaz is doing.
Yeah.
It sheds light on Judges, which is the part that it takes place in, but it also looks forward to David.
Right.
Totally organized.
Absolutely.
I mean, phenomenally written.
Yeah.
It's astonishing. The first recipients were probably Israelites living during the early days of King David's kingdom. So, and that makes sense because David basically loved God enough, was faithful enough, was planning to build the temple, right? That he would, by the work of his scribes, began to organize and place things into like a royal library, right? The history of the people. So that's kind of the backstop. When we read the Bible, we shouldn't look at it as like a loose collection of books that people somehow put together. This was all contrived.
Yeah.
This was all planned. This all had purpose. Every word, every line, every dot, it was all for the sake of an actual kingdom administrated by, in this case, kings before judges. And the kings were sin.
Right. Well, and it is crazy if you understand even a fraction of how well organized it is. You can't look at this and say, oh, this was just written by a bunch of desert hacks that didn't know anything.
No.
Well, yeah, those people couldn't do this.
Yeah.
People today with all the technology being able to reference things could not write fiction that self-references this way, that fits together
Past,
so well.
Forward, during,
everything.
A couple different meanings on motifs that follow.
And there's some phenomenal writing out there. And if those people couldn't do this, then the very people that they criticize and disregard the Bible is like, well, no, that's actually more evidence that this is all by design, because we're taking the different opposite ends of the conclusion from the same point. You're saying there's no way that these people could have written everything of value, and I'm saying yes, you're absolutely right. That means that they weren't the masterminds behind it.
Well, let's take this little snapshot in history, right? So you get like this 1300 BC to 1100 BC thing. Judges didn't realize that there was going to be a kings. During the time of the judges, they were just praying for deliverer would rise up, they would do their thing.
Right.
But the kingdom itself was already planned out in Ruth and Boaz during the time of Judges.
And they couldn't have known that.
And how did they know that? But David, on the other hand, had a time of national safety and international expansion.
So he actually could be purposeful in the pulling together of
putting all this information together.
Right.
And remembering, and this gives you the motivation for remembering Ruth, she was his grandmother. Great-grandma. Yeah. So David was uniting the 12 tribes under his military leadership, just like Samuel said would happen. Right. Take your young men and your young women as servants, and of your crops to feed, right? Everything happened as it was supposed to and was prophesied to happen. So he was leading the nations in victory after victory over the Philistine, the Moabites, the Syrians, the Edomites, the Ammonites, the giants, the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, right? There was this whole Haram thing, which we'll get into a little bit later. The Ark of the Covenant had been brought to Jerusalem, and the capital and nation were expanding under the blessings of the Lord, which in this case comes from a Moabitess named Ruth.
Right.
Unfortunately, some difficult days lay ahead for David and his kingdom. So these are the people who are reading this. So you have to kind of remember that when we get into these books, they happened, then they were compiled, then they were recorded for a further the generation after.
Right.
So when we're reading these, we got to realize that it's just very purposeful.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is how we want to read it. You live in the kingdom period. You're living in a time of national security and prosperity, meaning kind of the wars are outside of your kingdom gates now. You're living now in the land of milk and honey with cisterns that you did not dig and homes that you did not build. Everything's good. David, the Davidic king, the one who conquers and leads the people, who now has a covenant all his own called the Davidic covenant, is running the show. You have the real kingdom.
Yeah.
And you're looking back. There's obedience in the nation, and it's brought blessings. And so now you're recording the former things. There's always been uncertainty that the good times will not last. You want to read Ruth and learn about the loyal covenant love of the God that you serve. that the God that you served was faithful to Naomi, and when she was unfaithful, he made a way.
Right.
He was loving to Naomi, even when she thought that the hand of the Lord had gone out against her. He had a purpose in bringing Ruth, a Moabitess, somebody from Moab. It's a total turn of events. It's an example of God's love for the whole of the nation.
Right.
It's an example of God's love for the whole world. So now you have to be the light, and you have to draw the nations, and you have to conquer the evil, and you have to always consider what God has done. So you're learning about the loyal love of Ruth towards Naomi, and God, that she changed, right? So you're looking out at these nations going, well, they can change. Right? It's a kingdom time, and you're supposed to go out and conquer them, but at the same time, you're supposed to convert them. The kingdom was created to convert the people, a priesthood, a nation of priests. That's how we're supposed to read this. So godly character matters. Boaz was the man who had the godly character. He reached out to this Moabitess. She had changed her ways and came into the kingdom, became an Israelite. God never forsook his people for the people outside. Instead, he changes them and makes them like you.
Right, yeah. He brought her in, yes.
Yep, he has steadfast, loyal, covenant love. That's the point of this book. The argument is that Yahweh delivers, redeems, and restores his people, in this case Naomi, and her family, and her lineage, because of his loyal covenant love. The key verse, if you want to read it, Ruth 4:14.
Sure. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth."
There we go.
Yeah, that's a strange term that when I was rereading the book of Ruth, the kinsman redeemer. Like, we don't go around saying that. And
that's right.
And so I was looking into that a little bit, and it
it's
pulls the story together.
It's a motif that
Yes.
considers that goes all the way to the kinsman redeemer who redeemed all the people.
Exactly.
And it goes back to the kinsman redeemers who redeemed all the people. It's forward and backwards.
Right.
But we gotta go, mister.
Yep. Good talking to you.
Thank you for joining us. Come back soon.
Thank you for joining us for Modern Mind, Ancient Book. We hope that the time spent with us was valuable for you. It certainly was for us. Like Isabella said, please come back soon.